Well, good morning to everybody. My name is Steve McKay. I'm an associate professor of sociology at UC Santa Cruz and the director of the Center for Labor Studies. And I'm here this morning with my great colleagues and community partners. And I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves.
Good morning, buenos dias. My name is Paulina Moreno. I'm one of the project directors at Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County.
And good morning, buenos dias. I'm Maria Elena de la Garza, the executive director to CAB.
Fantastic, thanks. And so one of the things we want to discuss this morning is over the last 7 years, we've been working together on a series of projects that we now call community-initiated student-engaged research. And we've had over 300 UCSC students involved, and CAB and the Thriving Immigrant Collaborative have been part of that. And we've taken on a number of different issues, 3 large projects over the last 7 years. The first on low-wage work, where we work very closely with the Day Worker Center that the Community Action Board runs. A second project that came out of that after talking to people about the issues was the issue of housing. And so we did a large project called No Place Like Home, the Affordable Housing Crisis Study of Santa Cruz County. And then CAB was a major part of that. And then out of both of those projects came a focus or an interest on looking at particularly how immigrant and immigrant families of mixed documentation status are affected by local issues and changing political conditions. And so that project called We Belong, now we're working with Community Action Board and a new and exciting collaboration across multiple agencies called the Thriving Immigrants Collaborative. And so I want to ask, and CAB has been such an important part of the recent response to both the wildfires in California and the pandemic. So I wanted to ask first, sort of what has CAB, Thriving Immigrants Collaborative, been doing since March and the pandemic? And particularly wanted to ask, what do community partners like CAB, particularly ones working with immigrant communities, need from universities in these times?
So I'll jump in, and I just want to say thank you, Steve, to you and to your program for inviting us to have this conversation, because the needs are great, the potential is great, and the force of when universities and community-based organizations come together is great. And so, thank you for asking about how Community Action Board has responded in this, in this critical time. Our community was hit very, very hard, as many communities across the nation. And with the double impact of fire response, people are suffering in our community. And one of the things early on through CAB and one of the programs that you've mentioned, we were quick to see the impacts of what the sheltering in place orders had on the communities that we serve. And I can share that the day the shelter in place orders were issued in our county, our community that was most impacted the quickest was our day worker center community. Our day workers went from job matches from 150, 250, in the summer 300 job matches per week to 0, to none. And all of a sudden, this community of people, heads of households, single parents, people taking care, sandwich generation, taking care of their parents and taking care of their children, undocumented folks, homeless folks, who all received job matches through the center, all of a sudden that support was disappeared. And so we had to pivot quickly. We reached out to our community partners and immediately created strategies in response to keep revenue flowing to those families, to keep food flowing to those families, because we knew they were the highest impacted in this community. And so I'll let Paulina share a little bit about her work with our immigrant families and specifically around the disaster relief assistance for immigrants work.
Yes, ditto on what Maria Elena said earlier, Steve, about the opportunity to share what CAB has been doing during this time. Community Action actually was one of the 12 CBOs that was selected across the state to work with the governor's office to issue the disaster relief assistance funding for immigrant communities. This is a historic one time that California really, stepped up, and it's just vision of who are the communities that are being most impacted, that have least access to resources because of their immigration status, And what does economic recovery even begin to look like when we start, incorporating people regardless of their immigration status? So we're thankful for, the state and all the advocates that, of course, have continued to push this conversation forward. And, we learned a lot through this process. We were selected to administer one-time funding assistance of $500 up to $1,000 per household across 4 counties in the Central Coast: Santa Cruz, Monterey, San Benito, and San Luis Obispo. And that was 4,500 families that were, served. 4,500, I always think about 4,500 data points that previously we did not have about the impact of COVID in our communities. And so when I consistently think about the opportunities to partner with universities and institutions of higher education, is to think about the possibility of what that data and storytelling that we often as smaller nonprofits lack the capacity to do on our own, exploring and co-creating questions that we know we need the data for, but we lack the capacity to collect, right? And so I think that for me, I am particularly excited about, mentioned the continuous partnership with UCSC and your project specifically, and what We Belong could mean for our community as what we've learned from the other projects, such as No Place Like Home and Working for Dignity. And so
I want to jump in and just give a really tangible recent example, Steve, around our last conversation and what has happened, and the connection that happened between the university, CAB, and the city of Watsonville, where we have our administration offices. We had a casual conversation around, why is the partnership important, and what can we use, and what do we know thus far? So Professor Steve is telling us, all the wonderful work that's happening with We Belong and the university, and then it dawns on me that I sit on the Downtown Advisory Council for the redevelopment of the city of Watsonville. And one of the questions that the consultants asked is, how do we measure success? Whatever plan that we create for the shift in downtown city of Watsonville, whatever plan we create, how do we know we'll be successful? And my answer to that was influenced by the We Belong project. How do we know? We will know we're successful when we have a community where every community member says that they have a sense of belonging. That is critically important to me and to this community. And so with that, we've connected Steve to the city of Watsonville, to those folks who are leading those conversations, because the university and the work that Steve and his team are doing will help us ensure that those voices will help us ensure that we are committed to that sense of belonging, which I think is critically important in our work. So that's a tangible example of how universities and nonprofits and government jurisdictions can come together and influence systems change.
Could you say maybe a bit about what have been some of the barriers that the partnership, from your point of view, has been facing, and particularly given all the stress of the recent developments and the pandemic?
Sure. I'll jump in, and I just want to say, before the barriers, the importance of why it's a good match. Why CAB and UCSC and the work that you are pushing forward is a good match. And I want to say this is critically important for others, other universities or institutes of higher education, in looking at strategies and ways to connect with folks like us. Is we have to be, as you know, aligned in our values and aligned with a clear understanding of the mission of our work. We exist to eliminate poverty and create social change. You exist to create social justice movements and educate your students and connect them to the community. And that's why our partnership works. And without that alignment, a commitment to service, a commitment to equity, a commitment to social justice, without that alignment, a core alignment from both our institutions, this partnership wouldn't work. And so in speaking about the challenges exist. You are a huge institution. We are our own institution. And those systems sometimes don't match. And I can, and that's, that's a real thing that we have to deal with. One of the real basic example, the universities work on quarter systems or semester systems. Our needs go way beyond that. We need help. We need help. And sometimes those systems don't match. I can tell you that you have our commitment to do the very best that we can. And sometimes those systems don't match.
As Marilena mentioned, sometimes those systems don't match, and the opportunity that exists with, the level of proximity that we are to the university is often a challenge as well. Santa Cruz is a beautiful county, and the university is way up in a hill. Often many of our youth in South County have not once visited the university. Many of the students that the university attracts or even accepts are not from the community, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we are quote unquote maybe a college town, if for lack of a better word. But so oftentimes the level of how close we are, not just in distance, but in relationship to the community, to the university, becomes very challenging. Yeah. It becomes challenging with transportation. It becomes challenging with, just basic knowledge of culturally and competence in terms of, but it becomes a challenge. And so, we've been able to work through those, I think, slowly, but, I do want to highlight that the distance, both seen and unseen, is one of the things that I think often is a barrier.
Add to that, thank you for that. That is so critically important. But I want to add that community-based organizations are community-based, and people who come to help us, either as volunteers, as interns, as externs, we need folks who speak the language, who understand the community, who understand socioeconomic issues, who understand what it means to be of service in a community. And it's a challenge when there's a wonderful, bright individual who wants to help and doesn't speak the language of the community. And so it becomes hard to align in place. And so I think reflection of the community is important. And I challenge institutes of higher education to think about, what Paulina is saying. How do you recruit and attract your own students from your own community? I was invited to be a keynote address at one of the graduations last year at the university. And I remember talking to the graduates, and I said to them, how many of you are staying in this community? And not one raised their hands, not one. And for me, we're missing something. If our students are not going to school locally, if our students who are born and raised in the community are not staying to work and give service back to that community, we've missed an opportunity, and our systems need to be aware of it. We need to name it. Shame on us. And what are we going to do to make it better?
And so part of it is thinking about one of those shared missions of the public university, and that we should be community-based. And you're right, shame on us for not having that connection. We're trying with our partnership to bring students from across California who share some background to learn how to do community-based work and be introduced to that. And I'm glad that at least some of our graduates and of our partnerships have gone on to work at some of the nonprofits locally, but clearly we have to do more also of recruiting local students into the university, preparing them for service to the community, and then returning to those communities, right? And continuing serving them. And so that we hope that will, we could be an incubator for that kind of development.
And then we can be an incubator for that kind of development, right? It's both of our entities working together towards a common goal. We need a workforce. We are hiring every day. We are hiring new folks, right? Nonprofits are a viable economic development force in a community, and they're overlooked by many of our graduates. They don't think about nonprofits as a career path. And, you know, you're speaking to someone who started, you know, with frontline, you know, teaching job readiness to kids who were impacted by violence, right? 30 years ago, for God's sakes, and moving through, you know, the ranks to become an executive director in my community. And so I don't think that we're doing a good enough job to show young people, to show students that there is a career path in service and that there is a viable career path in nonprofits.
So I want to thank you both. I think it really is this important long-term level of respect and commitment that makes the difference. And I'm honored to be your partners. And I want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate the opportunity. Keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Thanks.